This is David Lichtenstein, and welcome to the Yeshiva Shalom. I'm doing this introduction from Yerushalayim, Meir. I came for a few days. This week's program is going to be about Shalom Bayis, and it's appropriate before Rosh Hashanah. When I learned in the Meir of Chaim Shmulevitz before he was Nifta, he gave one great last year, it was Yom Kippur, and everybody thought he would be speaking about probably something, about Mashiach, about Kedusha, about Torah, about Kol, about Mikvah, about, the Malchus of the Rabbi Shalom. Imagine the last shmooze of his life, and he got up, and what does he speak about? He spoke about the chiyuv of hakaras hatoiv, of a husband to a wife, with knowing that the Rebbitzin was in the gallery listening to him. So this week, what are we speaking to? We'll be speaking to, from Eretz Yisrael, Reb Zev Leff, the famous author, Paisik, the Rav of Moshav Matisyahu. From New York City, psychotherapist, Dr. Meir Wikler, author of many books about Shalom Bayis. Reb Nissan Kaplan, he's formerly Rosh in the Meir. Now he's Rosh of Daas, Aron. He's Mechaber of Shalamei, Nissan, Birchas, Chassanim, and Torah Mitzian, the very famous Goyin from Eretz Yisrael. We'll have him on as well. From the 5 towns, Mrs. Slovei, Jungreis-Wolff. She's in charge of Hineni for couples. All are experts on Shalom Bayis. Some of the things that we will be addressing is, are you responsible for your spouse's Shalom Bayis? It's slichus. Your husband just doesn't want to get up in the morning. Too hard. Well, are you his mashkiach? Or are you your wife's mashkiach? What happens when there's a level of religious status between the two couples? One is holding one place, one is holding the other place. Many other questions like this. So this should be a wonderful program. Before we start, I would like to say a little thought on the parsha. Rosh Hashanah is right around the corner. What do we know about Rosh Hashanah? What does the Gemara say? Ein va'ata elo lashin shuva. Va'ata ma Hashem alekecha shalom lecha. Now, what is Rabbi Shalom? Why is tshuva called va'ata now? And you see it in another place. We see many times it says Vayihi Hayoim by the Shunamis. So Gemara says it was Rosh Hashanah. Hayoim, today, now, is called Rosh Hashanah, as man of tshuva. Why is that? It's always a good time, like the Gemara says in Bracha, so Levi, person should do tshuva kol hayoim. But let's look for a deeper meaning. Do you know that there's a concept called determinism? Very active in psychologists. Many psychologists believe in determinism. My father drank, my grandfather drank, and that's why I drink. My father was overweight, my mother was overweight, my grandmother was overweight, and I'm overweight. My father was a lo yutzlach, my mother was a lo yutzlach, my zayda was a lo yutzlach, I'm a lo yutzlach. Trapped in the past. And it doesn't just have to be with parents. You could be trapped in the past with grief, hate, anger, loss, frustration. And what does all of that mean? That means my today is determined by something that has nothing to do with today, something either in the past or something that transcends me, my parents, my lineage. And therefore, I don't have the ability to choose who I am. That's determinism. And you know what? What does Bechira mean? Bechira means whatever happened to you, you still have choice. It doesn't mean it will be easier. Yes, there could be a predisposition, but ultimately you still have the choice. Which is why the Rambam brings all the dinim of Bechira, all the discussion of Bechira in Hilchos Tshuva. Because if we believe in determinism, there is no makom for Tshuva. The ability to let go. You can be a prisoner of yesterday, and therefore there is no today, or there is no tomorrow. Somebody could be sitting at the beach. The water is perfectly blue. He's holding an iced Coke in his hand, Diet Coke in my case. He's looking out. The wind is blowing, and he's in Gehenna. He's thinking about that interview tomorrow, the litigation tomorrow, the date he has tomorrow, the date he doesn't have tomorrow. Right? The business deal, the learning, the bafaher, name it. He's not today. He's not living here. He's a captive. You could be a captive of the past or of the future. So what does it say? We believe in Bechira, and therefore ein va'ata elo lashin shuva, right now. You don't have to live in the past. You can live right now where you are. And you know, it's interesting. There are two, my son-in-law, Rabbi, told me, they said there are two words for time in Hebrew. There's Zman, and Zman means, Miloshin has Zman and Milsa here, to prepare. You know, when you say Zmanim L'Simcha, it's a time to be Misameach. So it's a time to do something else. It's more the more modern understanding of time. But the Torah has another way to call it. It's Ace. Ace is Ata, right now. Not because it's a Hazmana, not because I'm supposed to be planning, not because of a futuristic thing. Just right now. There are Chaf Dalet Item. They are all right now. And it's interesting. Not everybody agrees to this halachically. There's a famous Radvaz, that Radvaz paskins, that the most important mitzvah that you could do is the mitzvah that's right in front of you. And therefore, let's say you have a minor mitzvah. You could give tzedakah to somebody. They said, look, I need another dress. I need another suit. Right? It's a nice mitzvah. And you know tomorrow somebody's going to be coming for Pidyon Shvuyim. Do you give the $10 now? It's right here? Or do you give it for tomorrow? Wait for tomorrow. And you know how the Radvaz paskins? The most important time in your life, the most important mitzvah in your life, is the mitzvah right now. The Chacham Tzvi interestingly argues on it. But halachically, many poskim say a minor mitzvah of now is a major mitzvah of tomorrow, because we live in the now. You know, there was a book came out recently. It's called Identical Strangers. Fabulous story about a great psychologist who was a Jewish psychologist. He was greatly criticized for this, Peter Neubauer. And what he did is he separated, sounds very cruel, and it is. I mean, you know, it's very scientific. They separated twins and triplets, and they put one in a very affluent household and one in a poor middle class, and one in with the triplets, one affluent, one middle, and one blue collar. And what he tried to do is he wanted to establish whether it's genetics that determine who we are, or whether it's the nature, the nurture, the societal advantages that are given to us, that we live in every day, that determine who we are. And the story is, it started with this boy goes to summer camp. And wherever he goes, people are smiling and waving to him. He had no idea. And then somebody came over to him and called him, and he said, "Hi, Mark." And my name, "What do you mean you're not?" And there was somebody who looked just like him. It was an identical twin. That's how the story begins to unfold. And then they found an identical triplet. And what did the study show? Yes, there are many areas where we're predetermined. They all liked a certain type of khaki clothing, and they liked certain types of spicy food, etc. But in many areas, they were totally different. The children who went to better schools did better than the kids who did it. But that means that so much of our life, we are not locked into our genetic predisposition. And that is what the concept of tshuva is. Vayhi hayom. Today we can let go of everything. And I'll tell you, I think it's both legally and halachically true in another way. And let me tell you a story. I think I said this story once on the air. There was a fellow, two partners in Oklahoma. They had been partners for many years. And one of them decided he wanted to go his own way. A deal came along, and he did the deal without his partner. The other guy really saw red. He said, for 30 years I'm with this guy, and now he decides to go off on his own. He took a truck. They had a trucking business, a Mack truck, and he drove it at full speed right up the one into the guy's front porch. And he destroyed the front half of his house. You know, sometimes Hashover Keli B'chamasei, right? When Meir says, Zorak Kli Mireish Hagag, so the Rishonim ask, it's worthless. Why should you pay for it? So the famous Beis Halevi says, I wanted to destroy the Kli. He wanted to destroy this house. Okay. 2 days later, a tornado rips through town, and the house is flattened. Meanwhile, the guy who was the owner of the house sues the guy who crashed into it, and they go to court. He says, he crashed into my house. He caused $25,000 of damage. So the guy who did it said, $25,000 of damage? Your whole house was flattened 2 days later. Show me the damage. How did I damage you? What did the court rule? Well, so we don't care what happens tomorrow. At the time of the event is the only time that matters legally. And in Halacha, it's the same thing, would be the exact same psak. If you went to a Rav and asked him this question, the only thing that matters is right now. Tomorrow doesn't change today. Yesterday doesn't change today. We control today. And that's no matter, I don't have to be precast. I'm not cast in stone based upon a way parental or some experience. I and you have the bechira to change our very today. Ein va'ata ela lashon tshuva. We control the va'ata. We are not predetermined. It's before Rosh Hashanah, so it's a time of tshuva. So tshuva begins with me. And I want to apologize to many of our listeners who at times got offended by some of the opinions mentioned here, because we do have many different opinions. We try to bring things, and many people, it's opinions that maybe they don't agree with, and maybe somebody's feelings were hurt. And certainly some of the interviewees, who sometimes I could ask questions that are direct, or, it could turn a little bit into a debating match, which I certainly, if any of them are listening, I ask them to be my Shalamei. And lastly, to all of you who say, it's the call of the Yeshiva Shalmaila, who gave you the Rishus to be a Rosh Yeshiva? And I think that you're right. But I want to repeat the story, the oft-repeated story of the Chafetz Chaim that I said. The Chafetz Chaim used to say in Moshav, he would say that there was an industrialist who had a factory in Russia. And in the distant part of Russia, and he goes to visit it. And they're all excited, or, the industrialist is here, and they give him a glass of tea, and in the bottom of the tea there's a little sand. He says, excuse me, why is there sand in my tea? So he said, here in this part of Russia, there's no good filtration system, so the water has sand in it. He said, listen, you shouldn't be drinking from sand. Here's 50,000 ruble, go buy a filtration system, drink clear water. Comes back a year later, and they give him a tea, and this time it's without sand. And then he hears screaming, there's a fire in town. Well, there's a building on fire, and he sees people running over to the pump, taking a glass of water and throwing it on the fire. He says, excuse me, that's not going to put the fire out. He said, don't you have a fire hose? He said, of course we have a fire hose, but didn't you tell us to only use the filtered water? He said, Shaita, the filtered water is for when you're drinking tea. When there's a fire, you use a fire hose. So Rabbi Chaim said, used to be that to give over Torah. He said, Yerabach doima l'malach Hashem tzvakos. Right? They had to be doima, right? Moshav Aron, they had to be doima of the Shivim Kenim. He said, today there's a fire on the street, and when there's a fire on the street, you just hook up a hose. You don't care what type of water it is. And I think today, many of the topics we discuss are things that they're sensitive topics, but, it says, Ein Darshan Barayis Allah B'Shloisha. It's Ein Darshan Barayis B'Shloisha, excuse me. But today, every newspaper you open up is Darish Barayis. It's all over the place. Everything we speak about that's sensitive, the kids, our children, our peers, they're getting it every time you turn on your phone, every time you open up a newspaper, every time you walk in the street, you pass a billboard. So if we don't try to address these topics with the Rabbanim, and we don't try to do it through the prism, through the lens of Torah, the only impression we're going to have is what we see in the street. They speak about it so much more than we speak about it, right? We spoke about intimacy. We had on, Rabbi Esther said, a guy wrote a sefer on it, and he said, our Kabbalah is the best thing is not to talk about it. Really? So the only information should come from the street? So I just go back to this Chafetz Chaim, and I say, yes, you should have a Yeshiva Shalmaila, but in a time like today, anybody could hook up a hose. And I'm still to another thing to this. The Torah says there were two Aronis. There was the Aron that was Mitzupah Zav. Rashi says the other Aron was made out of eitz. It was simple wood. And that's the Aron that went for Milchama. The Aron, which represents the Torah, there's certainly a higher class of Torah. We're Mechaber Torah from the Moshe Aron, that is Kanim, Toshal Shelis, Ravina, Ravashi, all the way down the Rambam and etc., the Goyin, the Baal Shem, etc. And then there's the Aron that we need. We're in the street. The Aron that's not Mitzupah Zav. The Aron that's just made out of wood. The Aron that goes out to Milchama. So to all of you who were either offended, I ask you Mechila, and I'm Saimach on the holy words of the great Chafetz Chaim.
Now here's for this week's riddle. The Mesillas Yesharim in Perek Dalet famously says that tshuva is a great gift that the Rabbi Shalom gave to the world. And the reason being, he says, once you did an Aveira, who says you can get off who says there's a get out of jail free card? If somebody does something in the United States, he commits a crime, he robs, he murders, he mugs, you can't come to court and say, I'm sorry, I apologize, etc. So the Mesillas Yesharim says the concept that charata helps, and that's it, you could do tshuva, and the chet is gone, is a chiddush. It's a toivet to Klal Yisrael into the world. The problem that the Welt is and the Mesillas Yesharim is the Gemara in Kiddushin and Daf Mem and Bey says that if a person does mitzvahs his whole life, and then he's toyal rishonos, he says, "Oh, I never should have done that mitzvah. Oh, what's the halacha?" He loses the mitzvah. So you see that regret, as far as a mitzvah or an aveira, help retroactively, or maybe not retroactively, on a going forward basis, to erase them. So the question is, how could the Mesillas Yesharim say that tshuva is a gift? It's a taiva that the Rabbi Shalom does to the world and to Klal Yisrael. You have the same thing by mitzvahs too. If you afterwards you regret it, it's gone. So what's the taiva? You see, regretting something gives it the power of erasure. That is this week's riddle.
Let's go to our program.
We have the honor of having with us from Eretz Yisrael the Rav of Moshav Matisyahu, Rav Leff. He's born in New York. He was a Talmud. He's a Talmud of the Telz Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Gifta Zecher and Bracha. He's a Musmach of Telz. He was for many years the Rav of North Miami Beach. He teaches in our Sameach. He gives classes to Rabbanim. He has he's published many Sfarim, both Art Scroll and Targum. And he's an expert in Shalom Bayis. When you're the Rav of an entire city, you become an expert in Shalom Bayis. Welcome, Rabbi Leff.
Thank you.
So, can you, Rabbi Leff, what happens? Can I call you Reb Zev?
Fine.
Reb Zev, Again Reb Zev. What happens in marriages? Talk to us just as the Rav of a community. What are some of the major causes of breakdowns of Shalom Bayis? And how, as listeners, can we try to, inculcate them some of the wisdom into our lives and, either aid or prevent it from happening through our listenership?
Okay, let me perhaps start with a definition of Shalom Bayis, because maybe people are looking for something that doesn't exist, and because they feel frustrated because they can't find it, destroys their possible Shalom Bayis. Shalom Bayis does not mean a home where nobody ever disagrees, where everything is calm, serene, quiet, and no one ever argues. That doesn't describe Shalom Bayis. That describes a cemetery. Shalom, the concept of Shalom in the Torah is shleimus. Shleimus is perfection. Except for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nothing in this world is perfect on its own. Shleimus means the group effort, things working together, each one contributing its unique part towards the common good. Shalom Bayis could be a home where people disagree and argue and even raise their voices with one condition. Everybody's concerned about what is best for everyone, and each person contributes their unique part towards that home. Parents contribute their part, husbands their part, wives their part, children their part, and so on. And that's what a mishpacha is. Mishpacha, I think, comes from the word nispach. In modern Hebrew, a nispach is an attachment. A mishpacha is attachments. And that's where people learn social skills, how to live in the greater society by living in the mini society called a family. And when each person knows their place, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how they can interact with others and do so for the sake of the common good, that's Shalom Bayis. And if people are looking to create that kind of home, then there's ways of directing them and guiding them how to do it. If they're looking for utopia, where all of their needs and desires are taken care of, there's no situation in the world that exists like that.
And can I maybe have bring a raya? We say every day in davening, Oise Shalom B'mreimav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu. And we know in the Pamalya Shalmaila, the Gemara talks constantly about the disagreements, going all the way back to Adam. Halalu oime yivra, halalu oime al yivra. So, notwithstanding the disagreements, it says, Oise Shalom B'mreimav. And that's what we ask for ourselves. Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu. So we see that Shalom incorporates into its body conversation, debate, and disagreement.
100%. That's why Ose Shalom B'mreimav, HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes Shamayim. Shamayim is Eish and Mayim working together.
Okay, so that's the first Yesod. Continue. It's fascinating.
Okay. There are, I think, first of all, I think one of the problems today, why there is so many marriages that break up, is that people are not interested or in committing themselves to something and working on it. There's no situation in life where there aren't problems. That's what this world is all about, dealing with problems, solving them either by making the problem go away or sometimes by learning how to live with the problem, or sometimes by getting out of that situation. It's also a way of solving problems, but it takes tremendous amount of effort, and people today don't want to put effort in anything. We live in a society where people don't want to put effort into Torah and mitzvahs either. They want skulas that are easy, fast, and basically effortless. So if people would be committed and be willing to work out the difficulties and the challenges of life, then there'd be a lot more Shalom Bayis, and marriages would last a lot longer. Somebody once told me today they don't give out marriage licenses anymore. They give out learner's permits. So there's no real commitment anymore. But if people are committed to make it work, then it's possible to get direction and to get help and to get advice on how to make things work. That's how life is. What life is all about.
And let me again be as Tana the Messiah. My father, Zechariah Bracha, told me he heard over from Rabbi Yonis and Steif.
Yeah.
He said it was a Melitza, but he said it was Rabbi Yonis and Steif said it like it was an Ernst Devert. He said you say by Kiddushin Hareya Makudeshesli B'Tabaz Zo Kedas Moshav Yisrael. So we asked, why don't you say by Chanukah or by Matzah? Hareya Oichel Matzah Zo Kedas Moshav Yisrael. The Sukkah, you're going into the Sukkah Kedas Moshav Yisrael. So he said, why do you say Kedas Moshav Yisrael? So he told my father, he said, Moshav Yisrael, did they get along? It says, Arboim Shana Akut B'Dair. Mitzarum Gehag. It's 40 years they debated, they quarreled, they had a Das Koirach, and they had the Meraglim. And what does it say? Moshe constantly was mispal, and he put everything back together. He says, just like Moshe Yisrael, they stayed together for the 40 years through thick and thin. Harei Mukudeshesli Kedas Moshe Yisrael.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's it. People have to be committed to work things out and realize that no situation in this world is utopia. That's not what the world was all made about. In any case, some of the basic foundations of Shalom Bayis are very simple things. Hakaras Hatov, and not Hakaras Hatov for the big things, but for the small things in life. You know, the Rabbanan instituted a tremendous yontif on Tu B'Av. What happened on Tu B'Av, according to one opinion in the Gemara, that's the day they were able to get to the bodies of the people that were killed in Beitar. And the Romans wouldn't allow them to be buried for 3 years and left their bodies to the elements. And on Tu B'Av, 3 years later, they were able to get to the bodies and bury them, and a miracle happened. The bodies hadn't decomposed. So they made a tremendous yontif, and that's the day they make marriages. And they added a fourth bracha to benching. Now, on the surface, what was the big deal? These people didn't come back to life. They were just buried. The day you bury somebody is a day of Avelis. Why did they make such a tremendous yontif, and why was that a day for marriages? Because the Rabbanan knew that this was the beginning of a long golus. And if you don't appreciate even the small good things in this world, you'll never appreciate anything. So they made a yontif for that small good. It was 99% bad. But that 1%, that the bodies didn't decompose and they were able to be buried, it's worth making a yontif for that. That's how you get married. If you understand that you recognize the good, even the small things, then you'll be constantly grateful to your partner in marriage on both sides, and that's one of the foundations of a happy marriage, hakoras hatov. And therefore, in order to have that hakoras hatov, you have to be done with kapschus, not just strangers, but your own spouse. That maybe if they did things that you don't like or you think were wrong, maybe they didn't do them spitefully, maybe they didn't do them on purpose. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And also there's a halacha that if you have an animal that's a treifa, that was mauled by a wild animal, so you throw it to the dogs. So the Daas says why? Because every herd has a sheepdog that watches it, protects it. So if you have a sheep from the herd that you can't eat, show your hakoras hatov to the dog, give it to the dog. There's only one problem. The reason that animal was mauled by a wild animal, because the dog didn't do his job. Says the Daas, but true, but the dog did his job other times. Just because once he didn't do his job, you shouldn't be grateful to him. So if that's the way you treat a dog, surely you should treat human beings like that, surely your own spouse. So you can't always be looking, what did you do for me now, lately? But remember all the good things, even at a time when there are things that are difficult and challenging or whatever. So I think that is a foundation of a good marriage, is where people to each other and show tremendous hakoras hatov.
And let me share with you, when I was a bacha, my first year in Eretz Yisrael, I learned in the Meir for many years. My first year in Eretz Yisrael, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz was nifta, and before he came out to speak on Yom Kippur, the last time he spoke in his life, and everybody was wondering what he was going to say. Was he going to speak about Torah? Was he going to speak about Hasmada? Was he going to talk about Tefillah? Was he going to talk about Tshuva? Was he going to talk about Mashiach, Emunah? And the last shmooze of his life, he got up and he spoke about the chiyuv of hakoras hatov that a person has to have to their wife.
Wow. Okay, you see, Baruch Shekivanti. But you see that is a foundation. It's a foundation of everything in Yiddishkeit, but most certainly a foundation in marriage. I think another foundation is kavod, is respect one for the other. The Rambam says that a husband has to be mechaber his wife yoser migufo, more than his own body. And it says a woman has to be mechaber her husband yoser midai, more than enough. What does that mean? First of all, kavod, the chochmas adam, by Kibbud Avoim, explains that kavod comes from the word kaved, something that's heavy. You can't just push it around. You consider it important. In Yiddish, it farnems an ort. It occupies a space. In the 60s...
Well, like you say in English, when somebody's a heavyweight, what does it mean?
Right, exactly. Right. Today it means something else, but in the 60s, it meant that they're an important person. You just can't push them around.
And the opposite of when you call somebody a lightweight. It's
right, exactly. So a husband has to be machshiv what his wife does. I think that either Yisrael Salant or one of his Talmidim, I think maybe of Naftali in Amsterdam, would come home Friday night and stand by the door and look at the beautiful Shabbos table that his wife had prepared and take it all in to show her that he was mechaber it, that he respected it. He felt that it was something important. You know, a lot of times men who are very different than women and what's important to them. The wife asked the husband, what color do you think we should paint the living room? Or where should the couch be? And the husband couldn't care less. As long as there's a couch to sit on, what does he care where it is? Or what color the living room is, as long as there's walls. But to a woman, those things are many times important. So the husband has to be mechaber and consider what his wife considers important, because if she's important, what she considers important is important to him. And even though to him, his own needs, it's not important, but because his wife is important, what she wants and what she needs is important to him. That's yoser migufo. And a woman, yoser midai, a woman has to respect her husband and consider him important more than people on the outside, one way or the other. Sometimes a person gets a lot of respect on the outside, but his wife knows that he doesn't really deserve all that respect. She has to respect him as he is respected on the outside and figure that if people feel like that, maybe she's making a mistake. And the opposite is also true. Sometimes she sees the milas of her husband, and people on the outside don't see them and don't give him the respect he deserves. So she has to respect him more than what she would see if on the outside he gets more, or on what she sees if the outside he doesn't get such covet. But each one considers the other one important and is machshav what the other one does. That's another foundation in Shalom Bayis.
So let me ask you, Rabbi Leff, some halacha questions, okay?
Okay.
What happens in Shalom Bayis when one of the parties wants to be makil, something that the other one doesn't? One of the spouses, and it could be a kula in many areas, in Chalav Yisrael, in Kashrus, and they say, look, I'm digging my heels, and this is very meaningful to me. How much of chumrah, kula, halacha, the Gemara says they were moichik the shem l'shalom bayis, right? What can you, as a Rav, what do you tell your constituents when it comes to a real shalom bayis issue, a deadlock? Okay, you have to be mavatir, even though you could say, I want to be machmir, I hold like the Rambam, the Ravid. Give us some guideline.
Okay, first of all, let me in general speak about chumras, kulas. One of the big problems today is that people are not familiar with what normative halacha is and what are chumras and what are kulas. And all of them are important. Sometimes, or most of the time, people have to follow normative halacha. Not every time is being machmer a positive thing. Somebody wants to be machmer and not drink water out of the sukkah, but he doesn't have a sukkah available. So he's going to be makel on Simchas Yantiv and torture himself over Yantiv because he can't take a drink of water out of the sukkah. So that chumrah is not perhaps a positive thing. Sometimes, because of a person's needs and what his makeup is, he has to be machmer, because if he'd follow the normative halacha, it would lead him the other way. Sometimes just the opposite. Because of a person's makeup or whatever, he can't follow the normative halacha. For him, there has to be a kula. Somebody's about tshuva, lives in a family where they're hostile to his way of life, and if he's machmer, it's going to cause them more hostility. Maybe as long as he's in that situation, in certain areas, he has to be makel. Kulas that are acceptable under situations that are less than ideal. So sometimes a person has to be machmer, and sometimes a person has to be makel. And most of the time he has to follow the normative halacha. People are not aware of what these three areas are, and people think the chumras that they do is halacha. So anybody who's not machmer is a sheketz. And people who follow kulas don't know their kulas. They think that's normative halacha, and they look at people who keep the normative halacha as fanatics. So therefore there is place for chumras, there's place for kulas, there's place for normative halacha. A Rav has to be able to assess the situation and see where a chumrah is necessary for a family, or where at least one member of the family, for them, that chumrah is necessary. And it may not have to affect the entire family, but at least people should be able to respect that. Or the opposite, where it's necessary for a family member to have a kula, it may, again, not have to affect everybody, but at least should be accepted and respected, because that's what that person needs. And sometimes either side has to be mevater to the chumrah or the kula of the other in order to maintain Shalom Bayis.
So what do you say, Rabbi Leff? Listen to a concrete example. This is not a chumrah kula. A psychologist this week called me up. He said he's dealing. Could he give him some thoughts? He's dealing with a very earnest, obviously yeshiva man who went to work in New York City, so one of the boroughs of New York City, and they have 6 children, and the wife says, "You're never home. You come home from work at 7 o'clock, you eat supper, you kiss the kids, and you run to night seder." So she says, "My kids never see their father. I never see my husband. I don't want him to go to night seder." And the husband says, "I'm sorry. When you end up with a conflict like this, how as a Rav do you deal with it?
So I would see, first of all, if there's a place for a pshara. Maybe he can delay going to night seder, go a little bit later, go to a different place where night seder starts later, or maybe he can go only to a portion of night seder and satisfy at least that his wife will see that he's home with the children at least the early part of the evening when they need him, when they're up. That's the first thing. See if there's some kind of pshara that can be made. If it's impossible, it's either or, then I would see if either side, how much it means to them what they're doing, and how much it's going to destroy the Shalom Bayis if they're not mevater. And then maybe I would find a way of either side being mevater, understanding the importance of what the other one wants, and trying to find some other avenue for the other one to either have a husband that spends time with the children at a different time, or a husband who's able to go learn and have a seder at a different time than the night seder. Rabbi Salanter said that there's no general rules in Torah, and even that's not a general rule. There's only details. Every situation is different, and I'd have to really know the makeup of the husband, the makeup of the wife, what's really the underlying problem here. Is it really that she wants him to be with the children and to be with her, or is there something hiding behind that? And how important his learning is to him, or is maybe an excuse sometimes to get out of the house and to avoid the responsibility of the children. So there's so many different possibilities. I think you can't make a general ruling. Every situation is different and needs to be dealt with differently.
And as a follow-up, which is a question we've had for many listeners, they say, what happens? I got a woman asked. She said, my husband never gets up for davening in the morning. He sleeps, then he davens at home and he runs. He says, and Slichus is coming. He doesn't go to Slichus, and it upsets me. And I end up, telling him, and he ends up yelling at me, and it turns into a big Shalom Bayis issue. So do I just turn the other cheek? Or do I say, no, I have to keep the sanctity of my house where I should see that my husband goes to davening and to Slichus? A general question, let me attach on to that. Do you have any responsibility? Let me ask that, Ed. What would you say to this question?
Okay, again, I would have to really find out why the husband doesn't go to davening, what's behind it, right? It's just a laxity that he doesn't realize it's not davening.
She told me that he doesn't find it meaningful. That's what she told me.
I hear. Okay, so I would, first of all, try to counsel the husband and maybe point out to him, maybe the chashivas, maybe should find a different minyan to daven with. Maybe he should at least agree once a week to go daven with a minyan, and mitzvah goreres mitzvah. And perhaps she should realize that just like in any mitzvah of tochacha, just as much as there is a mitzvah to give tochacha, there's a mitzvah where you know that it's not going to help and perhaps even be counterproductive to keep quiet. So I would counsel the woman to try to find a softer way of trying to give her husband the incentive to want to go to daven. maybe explain to him how much he would have more respect in the eyes of his children, her eyes, or whatever. At the same time, not to put him down and make him feel that he has to maintain his way because otherwise he's giving in. And I would try to explain to him and get him to give in a little bit once a week, to go to a davening in a place where you feel that it could be meaningful to you. Learn a little bit about what the meaning of the davening. Can read my sefer and understand what's it called, the meaning of Shemoneh Esrei. Work on each bracha one at a time and maybe appreciate a little bit more what davening is all about. It's not something that's going to change either of them overnight, but it's worth, if they're willing to put in the effort, it's worth the effort to come to a situation where there'll be a lot more harmony in their life than the constant fighting over something that is one has one way of looking at things and the other one has a completely different way of looking at it.
Rav Leff, do you believe a spouse is responsible for their spouse's Yiras Shamayim?
Everybody's responsible for everybody's Yiras Shamayim, except there are different ways of fulfilling that responsibility. And sometimes the responsibility demands that you look the other way and find other ways of subtly trying to increase the other spouse's Yiras Shamayim. And sometimes it's head-on because it's important for the family, for the children, and for the Taras HaMishpacha altogether. So again, each situation is different. Sometimes a spouse has to speak up, has responsibility. You have more responsibility for people closer to you than people farther away. And Kol Yisrael Arevim Zevazeh applies to husbands and wives also. But again,
but Rabbi, let's talk about a thing that does not affect the family, right? It's a personal thing. It's not davening where the kids, where it affects others.
Right.
One spouse, or do we say, listen, I'm not going to really change the other person, like the famous guy, and he says it's harder to change one. So all this is going to do is erode Shalom Bayis. And the erosion of Shalom Bayis is much greater likelihood than the ability to change the other spouse.
Right.
I mean, so do we say no? Your spouse is mashkiach, or do we say, listen, it's between them, it's ben adam lamakim, it's between them and their Rebbeinu Shalom. Why are you mixing in?
Right. I would give the impression from the spouse that wants to influence, but finds that if they try to do something, it just makes things worse, to give subtle hints, but to realize that if you can't do something about something and you'll only make it worse, then sometimes it's better not to have intervention and to work on other areas of strengthening the relationship, and then maybe it'll spill over to these areas also.
Now, Rav Leff, as a Rav of a city, have you ever come across where one spouse becomes irreligious and the other spouse maintains the Yiras Shamayim, and yet they manage to make the marriage work? In such a case,
a few situations like that. Not necessarily in my kehila itself, but in people that come to me from the outside. I've had a few situations like that, and as long as the spouse that is not Shomer Torah mitzvahs is willing to give in to a certain degree on areas that affect both of them, obviously Taras and Mishpach, Inyanim, and things like that, and the spouse that is Shomer Torah mitzvahs is willing to hold themselves back and not intervene where it's not going to be effective, and to basically not condone what's going on, but to turn a blind eye to a certain degree and respect the areas that the other spouse excels in, right, and recognizes those milas it can work. It's a very, very sensitive and like walking a tightrope. But I've known couples, families that have been able to keep like that, and over the years, many times the spouse who was not necessarily Shomer Torah mitzvahs, eventually, because they were treated properly and respected and not pushed, eventually come around and increase their Shmiras Torah mitzvahs.
So Rav Leff, what would you, if you had to make a closing thought about Shalom Bayis, what would it be?
Shlomo HaMelech says that Eishes Chayil miyimsa. It's very difficult to find an Eishes Chayil, which is not too praiseworthy of Jewish women. Seems like there's a scarcity of Neshei Chayil. Yet Shlomo HaMelech says, Rabos Banos Asu Chayil. I think the answer is that you can't just find Neshei Chayil, or for that matter, Anoshim, who are Anoshim of Chayil. But Rabos Banos Asu Chayil. If you work on it, then there are plenty of Jewish women that become Neshei Chayil and Jewish men that become Anshei Chayil. But you don't find them like you find pearls. They don't just grow on trees. You have to work at it. And if people are willing to work on their Shalom Bayis, then there'll be a lot more Shalom Bayis in this world. And the people who help them should be people who know what they're doing. I have smicha. I don't have a degree in social work. I'm not a psychiatrist. So I can work together with doctors, with social workers, with psychiatrists, but I should not encroach on their expertise. And I would hope that psychiatrists, social workers, and doctors don't pass shilas and encroach on my expertise. If people understand that and they seek help from the people who have the kalim to help them, also there'll be an increase in Shalom Bayis.
Of Leff, it was a great honor to have you with us. Thank you, and maybe you could wish all of us in the world a ksiva chsimatayva.
Okay, I first of all thank you for inviting me. I could use all the zechuyos I can get before Yom Adin, and Birchas Hedjit, that we should all enjoy a really fine, happy, healthy year of life, everything good, ruchnius and gashmius, a ksiva chasima tova to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Rav Leff. Kolta. We're speaking to a Rav HaGoyin, Rav Nissan Kaplan, as somebody who has many Jungelite, married individuals in Yeshir. Let me ask you a few questions about Shalom Bayis. Could somebody lie for the sake of Shalom Bayis?
We have a story in the Gemara that the Gemara really brings down that you could lie. The Gemara says that one of the Amoraim, his wife, prepared for him food that he didn't like. If he would ask for fish, he would get chicken. If he would ask for chicken, he would get fish. And his son asked him, so why, instead of asking for fish, should we give chicken? When you want fish, ask for chicken, you'll get fish. And he told him, Midvar Sheker Tichik. I'm using the question of the kid, not the answer of the father. The father was in a higher madrega. The question of the kids really teaches us that a person is allowed to, Mishum Shalom Bayis, you're allowed to lie. As a tshuva in the Ramah, that a person, a lady, had a baby before she was married, or maybe under she was married, be'oines, and then she had a baby with her husband. They were about to go to the Pidin Aben.
Shaila Bracha Levatala.
And it was a question, Shaila Bracha Levatala. And the Ramah says, Shmisha Nichta B'Kedusha Yimocha Alamayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu for Shalom Bayis, let's erase his name. Chofetz Chaim speaks about it if you're allowed to say Shvua for Shalom Bayis. I'm not going into the question of the Bracha La'alocha. I'm not going into the question of the Shvua, but to lie, you're allowed to for Shalom Bayis. But, there's a big but. A person has to know that lying for Shalom Bayis is the last solution in his life. Why? Normally, lying in marriage is the beginning of the end of the marriage. Lying in the marriage. I heard a story this week. A young man came to ask me. His wife wanted him to go to put money in the bank. She was in charge. She had the pants in the family. She ran it, but she asked him in the way to Koilel, and he said, yeah, he wakes up early, he will do it in the way to Koilel. The Koilel, I think, starts 9 o'clock in the morning. For sure, he woke up 9-ish, 10-ish. He got to the bank 11:30. He put in the money, and he went to the Koilel. He comes back home. His wife asked him, yeah, you did it? Yeah, in the way to Koilel, early in the morning, I did it. She asks him if she could get the receipt. Now, he already thought about it, so he tore off the time. You know, on the bottom of the receipt, you have the hour when he deposited the money. So she asked him, what happened to the bottom of the paper? So he said, oh, mistake, it got torn. Unpurposely. In the meantime, he's using your Eitzah to lie for Shalom Bayis, right? He didn't realize that a month later, when the statements came in the mail, today it comes in email, was the hour when he deposited. If he would say, I'm sorry, I got up late, could be she'll be upset for a day. Could be for 2 days. But after a month, she realized he lied. She thinks, who knows what else he's cheating? Who knows what else he's doing? Lying is the worstest thing. Rav Shach told me once,
so if your wife
the most don't say the truth.
If your wife asks you if her dress is nice, what are you supposed to say?
I think these kind of lies, you have to say that it's nice. The Gemara says, Beisilel, we say, Kala Nova Chasuda. We tell her you're pretty. It doesn't make a difference. She doesn't have to hear it from different people. She could hear it from her husband. It's a Gemara. We don't say Kala K'moi Shehi. We say that she's pretty, for sure. And again, these are lies that I don't think that you could be caught. And I'm saying again, even lies that you have to be caught, if you need for Shalom Bayis, you're allowed to. But like I'm saying, number one is the marriage member. The first thing that makes a real marriage is a lie. Because marriage is based on trust. In the Ksuva we write down, that we're not really speak about money. I don't think it means about these kind of things, but the idea is that it's a trust. And you know yourself, if your wife lies to you, how upset you get.
So,
also, I think it's not the right way to bring up a family. A person lies once, he goes into the mood and he starts to lie and lie and lie.
What about other halachas for Shalom Bayis? The wife has one standard of
So I heard from my father, Rav Ruderman told him that he was with the Chafetz Chaim, and it was the time to light Hanukkah candles, and the Chafetz Chaim's wife was not home yet. It was a question if to wait for his wife or not. The Pi Halacha, you don't need it to be there. And the Chafetz Chaim, this is what I think, I remember my father told me, I didn't check it now, my father is a Kaplan, he's a Talmid of Baltimore Yeshiva, he was very, very close to David Kronges and to Ruderman, he was like a Talmid Muvak, and I think the Chafetz Chaim told him, it's a Gemara, Chanukah Shalom Bayis, if you have to light a Chanukah, or to light the Shabbos candles, Shalom Bayis Adif. So you could have said, there's two mitzvahs. What mitzvah to choose? The Hanukkah candles or the Shabbos candles? Choose the Shabbos. The Chafetz Chaim took it one more step. The Shalom Bayis is more important, for sure, from not skipping the mitzvah, but from doing the mitzvah in a lighter ofen, and a lighter way, wait for your wife. Now again, like I said before, there's a famous story, and I'm asking Mechila, you know what, I will say without the name, because it's a very choshev yeshiva in America, and I don't want to get into trouble. But I heard it from very reliable sources. He was learning in Lakewood. Now, actually now he's living in Israel. He's one of the Gedolim in Israel. And he was learning in Lakewood. And every morning he got to Yeshiva and davened in Yeshiva. Suddenly, he stopped to daven in Lakewood Yeshiva. Rav Nissan, the Mashgiach, father of Yeshiva Rabbi Meir, called him over and told him, what happened to you? He said, for 3 or 4 years you didn't miss Shachis. Said Rosh Yeshiva and Mashgiach, I'll tell you what happened. I was in the way to davening, and I heard screaming. I went up, and I saw the almana with 4 little kids. She's not managing to dress them and to take them out to the bus, to the carpool. So I helped her to prepare the sandwiches. And I missed davening in Yeshiva. The other day it happened again. The third day it happened again. I just told her, don't worry, I'll just be there every morning. Mashgiach, I did the right thing or I did the wrong thing? He said, you did the right thing, but just tell me who is his family in Lakewood. I don't know about the Salmona. Lakewood was not so big then, yeah? He said, it's my wife with my 4 kids.
Right.
My own wife. So this story I say over every time. But
let me add on a story, not a dissimilar story. They say over from the Chafetz Chaim. I don't know if it was the Chafetz Chaim, but it's a Shemoneh Maisa that he came to a town, and everybody wanted to have him by their table, and there was one very mechubed. Some mechubed got him by the table, and he invited all his friends, and they had 50 people in the Chafetz Chaim. And when he came to make Hamaitzi, he saw that one of the 2 chalas was broken off a piece. It wasn't a shalom. So he said to his wife, we don't have shleimim, And he was embarrassed his wife. So Chafetz Chaim said, the reason we cover the challah on Shabbos is not to embarrass it because of the wine.
Yeah.
So he said if an inanimate object
was
so makbid on the derech eretz, how do we embarrass a person because of the fact that it's about missing the point, right?
But in the same time, I told you in Galite. I especially first say over the story because I want him to get the message very clearly. But I want to tell a guy, if you start to daven home, you will stay home every day. And the end davening will be 5 minutes. Shalom Bayis could move away temporarily a minyan. Temporarily to get late to Seder. If it starts to happen often, you need help. You can't carry on staying home. Shalom Bayis could be a one-time thing. To be mekel and things that the halacha you're allowed to be mekel. For sure not to be over halachas. If you start to set it like a standard, what happens is you start to go down. First, it's not good religious reasons. It's not right to the Rabbi Shalom, but I will tell you more from that. It will not give you Shalom Bayis. In the end, your wife will make you so upset, you'll feel so disgusted that because of that, you stop to be who you are. And a part of the Jewish person, for example, a minyan is a part of the person. It's a part of the Jewish thing. Even if you leave Yeshiva, even if you're in the world, a minyan is the structure of Klal Yisrael. So I first tell them the story to understand that if the wife needs sometimes help, you have to stay home. But then to understand that it's not an option. It's not an option. You could help the whole day in your house. And I give the example, I say, I have a friend that learned with me in Yeshiva. He became a diamond person. He's running around the world. No one tells him, Shalom Bayis, help your wife. I come back a little bit late from my learning, where is the Shalom Bayis? What is the answer? Him and his wife understands that for him, bringing money to the house is important for him to be out. So she's not upset and she's not demanding him to be there to help, right? You have to make your learning important enough for you and your wife that you will understand that you're bringing something important. If you feel that your wife is not feeling that, check if you're not learning like you have to learn. Maybe she realizes you're not unreal. Because if she would realize that you're collecting diamonds, like the other one lets the other one to go to collect diamonds, she will let you. So again, sometimes you're allowed to, but never to make it a kriyas. Again, sometimes your wife is very sick and you have to do it for a week. It's not just what I mean. But it's again and again, in the middle of Seder, for example, if she calls you, she needs help. You deserve that she called you. Why your phone has to be open? I'm not saying she's expecting, leave the phone open for sure, maybe she needs help. But if you answer everyone's phone, for sure you'll get phone calls for help. But when you're in the middle of a meeting with the president, your phone will not be open.
Well, I'll share a story with you. Years ago when I was in the Meir, I learned for a number of years with Rabbi Mechaber, so we became very friendly. And after I went to work, I came back to Eretz Yisrael once. He invited me and my wife for a Suda. And he asked me about, the type of hours that I work. So I told him there are times, I'm on. And he looked at his wife and he said, "Oh, you see what kind of hours you put in when you work?" And he was like making this point, like you say, sometimes people say, "Oh," and when we do it for work, everybody understands. And sometimes when we do it for learning, suddenly
every working guy leaves now 6 o'clock. Exactly, he leaves 6 o'clock. Yeah, he goes down to Manhattan, and he doesn't help the almana with the 4 kids.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Well, thank you very much, Rav Hagoyin, Rav Nissan Kaplan, for your Divrei Halacha, your Divrei Hisoros. Can I ask that we finish? You have so many Talmidim who listen. Finish off with a bracha.
I want to mention everyone that you will be zeichet, ksiva, v'chasima toiva. As Hashem will have a year that we'll be zeichet together to lavoi des Hashem besimcha, with a lot of love to the Rebbeinu Shalom, happiness in our own life, Shalom Bayis, nachas from our kids, closeness in the family, healthy and gesund and parnose, and ksiva v'chasima toiva to all of Klal Yisrael. And thank you for this beautiful time together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Kol tov, a good year.
We have with us on the phone Dr. Meir Wikler, a well-known psychotherapist from Brooklyn, New York. He has an office in Brooklyn and Lakewood, New Jersey. He's published many books. His latest book, Behind Closed Doors, has approbations, haskamis from Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky, the Zkana Rosh Yeshivas in America, the Novominsker Rebbe, and Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood, Reb David Shustel. It's an honor to have you with us, Dr. Wikler.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Dr. Wikler, could you try to, you're an expert in family counseling and Shalom Bayis, right? I've seen you've written books on the topic. What is the value of Shalom Bayis? Because we want to ultimately get into a conversation is what sacrifices should we make for it? Well, what's the value? It's good to have Shalom Bayis. It's good to be healthy. It's good to exercise. It's good to learn Daf Yomi. It's good to learn Starim. It's nice to have beautiful kids who go to good seminaries. And what is the value? Like, how would you try to give it some type of a perspective?
Okay. Well, we know in Birchas Kahanim, the third and final bracha is for Shalom. And Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not find any other keli, any other receptacle for brachas better than Shalom, and that's why Birchas Kahanim concludes with the bracha for Shalom. Shalom is the kli, is the vessel in which all other brachas are contained. If we have Shalom Bayis, then all other brachas come into the home, and it's the optimum environment in which to raise children, to bring up the next generation. If there's no Shalom, then it's hard to successfully fulfill our obligations of chinuch, and it's definitely going to have an impact on the children and on our entire lives. So that's why Shalom Bayis, I think, is so important.
Dr. Wikler, what are some of the common questions you would get, or give us like a handful of the most common Shalom Bayis issues and questions? What are some of the, we have a lot of young people listening as well as older, like myself. Give us some of the most common issues you confront.
Well, to summarize it, probably the easiest way to answer your question would be to say that when couples come to see me because they're in marital distress, it's generally because one or sometimes both spouses feel that their needs, whatever they may be, are simply not being met. Their emotional and psychological and sometimes practical needs are simply not being met, and they're, to my way of thinking, there is no greater tragedy and greater suffering that someone can endure in life as having marital distress. Even physical ailments are easier to cope with than a difficult, a stressful, a conflicted marriage. So couples are coming in because they're simply not getting their needs met. They don't feel heard, they don't feel understood by their spouse, and there's nothing more frustrating and aggravating than that. And what I try to do in my work with couples is to help them to communicate more effectively with each other. I define effective communication by communication where both sides feel heard, they feel understood. May not get full agreement in what they want, but at least they don't feel they're banging their head against a brick wall. Now, people very often ask me, what's the single most common marital problem that I've seen in my over 45 years of clinical practice? And I always give the same answer, that I find that couples have not learned how to communicate effectively with each other, and when they do learn how to communicate more effectively, then whatever the specific issue is that they're struggling with, or they're upset about, or that's bothering them, can be resolved and negotiated when they learn the tools for effective communication. And that's what I find to be the single most common cause and source of aggravation and heartache and unhappy marriages today.
What happens, Dr. Wikler, I'll share with you a story my father, Zechron Levracha, used to say over. He would say a fellow goes to a psychologist, and he says, I have a terrible inferiority complex. So the psychologist says, what's the problem? He says, I have one brother who's a nuclear scientist. I have the other brother who's a rav in a huge congregation, and I drive a truck. So the psychologist says to him, I have good news for you. You don't have an inferiority complex. You really are inferior. So communications is the number one problem. What happens, though, when there really is a problem? A wife says, I don't respect my husband. I thought I would get a guy who was going to be a real Talmud Chacham and a learner and a this, and he's not. Or he's a businessman. I thought he'd be a businessman in this, and he's sort of a shtickle yutzlach. Or I had a guy call me up. He said, I dated a girl who I wasn't attracted to, and my Rebbe, whoever it may be, said, after you marry her, that's when you're going to love her. He said, I'm living with a woman, and I'm not attracted to her. So the number one is truly communication. But what happens when you go past communication and you end up with issues like that? How do we address things like that?
Okay. In the examples that you gave, where someone wakes up at some point after they're married and decides that the person they married is not who they thought them to be, who they wanted them to be, who they hoped they would be, that's not really a marital problem, because a leopard can't change his spots, and some who is what he is not going to become something else just because that's what their spouse expected them to be. So I don't consider that a marital problem. I consider that a personal problem. You went into this marriage with expectations of change, let's say, and you realize now that change is not happening. And now you have to make a decision. Is this a marriage you want to save? You want to hold on to? You want to stay married to this person? Or do you want to leave them? So now it becomes a personal choice and a decision that individual has to make. And generally I find that to be most helpful with someone in a situation like that is to work with them individually, not as a couple. I've seen many people in the situation you described, and it's going to be almost a distraction to try to work with the couple, because a person can't become something that he's not. So a person can try to make accommodations, but at the end of the day, they are who they are, and if it's unacceptable to the spouse, then there isn't anything that they can do about it. And then it's a question of the spouse coming to terms with the reality of who they married. Now, if I'm working with someone like that individually, I would try to help them decide for themselves. Do they want to try to save this marriage? Do they want to make the best of it? Do they feel that they can't and they want to end it? Try to help them make that decision. Now, sometimes a person can be helped to focus on what what is there? The glass is half full. There are some reasons that the person was attracted to them in the first place. They didn't get engaged under duress. It was a willful bechira on their part to decide to get engaged. There was something positive that they saw in the individual initially when they were dating, and maybe they can somehow reclaim that and focus on that, and not focus on what's missing, but focus on what's there. If they're not able to do that, then they may decide that they don't want to continue the marriage. But it's a personal decision, and a person is best helped in making that decision for themselves, meeting with a therapist one-on-one. They can help them explore their feelings, weigh their options, consider the consequences, and make a decision one way or the other.
You know that the Yamim Naraim, the Tefillah of the Yamim Naraim is the Yud Gimel Midas Arachmim, which are the 13 attributes of forgiveness. And it's Hashem, Hashem. So the second Hashem is repeated. So the first Hashem, the Gemara says, is Kaidam Achet, and the second Hashem is Achar Achet. And so the Mefarshim say, if it's after the Chet, why is it the same Shem? And they say because after Chet, the first attribute of forgiveness is to try to look back at what was originally beautiful. When you're in an argument and everything has changed, well, what did you like about this person in the beginning? Where has something unchanged? It's true they're not attractive maybe, but what was it about their personality that you liked? Finding that particular attribute that is still the same, and like you say, focusing on that possible attribute.
Absolutely.
In your practice, how much have in-laws and family members, etc., how much of a factor is that in damaging marriages?
Well, I couldn't give you a number, but I could say that it definitely is a factor in some cases and plays a role, and that's part of the larger discussion that a couple needs to have about setting boundaries for themselves. Now, boundaries are a critical part of any relationship. There's things that you and I share with each other that we don't share with others. There are things that I tell you that I don't want you to tell others. There are things that I tell you that you could tell others. There are boundaries in every relationship. How far we go, how close are we, what do we allow, what we don't allow, when can I drop over and visit you, and when is it inappropriate, when should I call first, and who can I just drop in without being announced. These are boundary issues that we have in all social relationships, and it becomes critical in a family to be clear on the boundary issues. Now, regarding in-laws, for example, one spouse may say, I don't want you having so much contact with your parents. Sometimes that may be a controlling spouse who's trying to limit the contact, the normal contact that an adult child would have with their parents. At other times, the parent's influence may be toxic and may be interfering, and it may be appropriate to lessen the contact or the involvement with one's parents. And then that becomes an issue, again, that needs to be negotiated. But I come back to the issue of communication, that it can't be simply resolved by saying, your parents are interfering, I don't want you to speak to them anymore, or don't get on the phone every night and call your mother, or not going to allow your parents to visit under these conditions. Rather, it has to be something that again is negotiated in a spirit of openness and a respect for each person's point of view. One person is affected one way, another person is affected another way, and let's discuss the impact that this is having, how it makes me feel, how it makes you feel. Let's see if we can work out some kind of a working compromise, a resolution that will work for both of us. That's what problem solving and effective communication are all about. And some couples are not equipped, don't have the tools, and when couples don't have the tools to communicate effectively, to problem solve in a successful way, what ends up happening is what's the obvious default position. They have arguments, and arguments are destructive, they're painful, they do much more harm than good. And while people may vent their emotions when they have an argument, at the end of the day, they're worse off after the argument than before, and it's always better if they can avoid an argument and learn another way of negotiating their differences that doesn't have to cause so much collateral damage.
Now, let me share with you, Dr. Wikler, that in-laws is it seems to be a very historical problem. The Rambam in Ishus in Perek Yud Gimel Halacha Yudalad talks about a woman who says, "Ein ritzayni sheyavayu." I don't want your parents, your sisters to come to me because shemarinly they do bad to me. They speak badly of me. They mock me. Mitzarinly. Rambam says, "Shayminla." Seems that in-laws is a problem that goes back thousands of years, and the Rambam says the halacha is in-laws that are destructive. You listen, or siblings. He says you listen to the woman and the man. He puts it both ways. In fact, I think I once heard over years ago from Rabbi Aron Chadash, Mashiach in the Meir and Yisrael. He said Yisrei, he comes before Matan Torah and then he leaves. He says, why did he leave? So he says, as soon as he started giving eitzes, what did he tell Moshe? He said to Moshe, he said, V'ata sechse. He said, the minute the in-laws start giving eitzes, Moshe said, thank you for the eitzah, but I think it's time for us. I think it's time for you to go home. I heard it from Aron Chadash years ago, but it seems from the Rambam that it's really an ancient problem. What happens, Dr. Wikler, do you see... Go ahead, I apologize.
I just want to add to what you said, that there's a Mishnah in Pesachim that talks about the accepted practice at that time that we still have in many communities today, where the first yontif after a marriage, the couple is expected to spend together with the wife's family. And I think Chazal, in their infinite wisdom, understood that these in-law relationships are very sensitive, and it's helpful when the expectations are clear and the boundaries are clear and everyone understands what's to be expected in terms of visitation and contact and so on. And I think that Mishnah in Pesachim that talks about where the couple is going to be for the first yontif after marriage is so significant.
Thank you. Dr. Wikler, what happens when there's a significant differences about religious observance? The wife does not, or the husband, do not want to eat chalav Yisrael. They want to eat in a restaurant or a hechsha that the other one won't have. They want to go dressed in a way that's not accepting to the other. One person holds, you have Ramosha has shuvas about the husband wants the wife to wear a hat and she wants to wear a sheitel. Well, what happens if it's the other way? The husband wants his wife to cover more hair, or the wife wants to uncover some or all of her hair, and the husband doesn't. And there are now halachic issues, and one of the two spouses is pounding on the table and saying, you're being over under the Ferish Shulchan Aruch, or it could be a minig. How does a therapist try to resolve these issues?
Okay, that's a very sticky problem, but not an uncommon one, and certainly one that I've encountered many times in my practice. And it leads us to a larger issue, which is what you're hinting at in your question, is the role of the therapist in a situation like that. A couple comes in and one spouse says, I have the moral authority of halacha on my side, and therefore my spouse has to go along with what I'm saying. And the other spouse says, well, that may be so, but it's unacceptable to me, and I just can't go along with that, and I can't agree to it because it's just too difficult or unacceptable for whatever reason. And then they come in to see a therapist or a marriage counselor. The question is, what is the role that the third party is going to play? So, in my way of thinking, just to give a short hakdama to my answer, in my way of thinking, whenever two parties or two people have any conflict that they cannot resolve with each other, and they've come to the conclusion that the only way they're going to resolve this conflict is by including a third party to help them resolve the conflict, there's only two possibilities in a very general sense. for the role that that third party can play. And those two possibilities are serving as an arbitrator or a mediator. Now, in arbitration, the process is very simple. Both sides present their point of view. The arbitrator listens to both sides and then gives a kind of a psak, a ruling, a judgment. That's what happens when you go to a din Torah. That's what happens usually when you speak to a rav. And lahavdil elef alfei abdollah, you go to court. The court serves as an arbitrator. Ruvain owes Shimon $100. Shimon owes Ruvain $100, or they take the $100 and they split it 50-50, 50 to Ruvain, 50 to Shimon. That's the judgment of an arbitrator, and that's an arbitration process. And the mila of arbitration is that you can very often do it in one sitting. Each side presents their point of view, their argument, how they feel about it. The arbitrator listens, he hands down a ruling. Now that's a very, very effective method for resolving conflict that's used between two warring neighbors, two former business partners, a landlord and a tenant. However, in my experience, I've found that arbitration fails miserably to resolve family disputes. Now, it may be that one spouse has the moral authority of halacha on their side, and it may be that what the other spouse wants to do is may be questionable or compromising or more makel position on halacha. Nevertheless, if the third party serves as an arbitrator in a family conflict, in a marital conflict between husband and wife, that's usually going to fail to resolve the issue. And even if both sides say they're willing to have arbitration, they're willing to go to a third party, whatever he says they're going to do, what ends up happening is when they get home, one spouse says, well, the arbitrator said you have to do it like this. And the other one says, no, that's not exactly what he said. Well, he did say it like that. No, he didn't say it like that. And then they have
and let me interrupt, Dr. Wikler. I'm one of a family of 7. The only way to get heard at my Shabbos table was to interrupt. When the pasuk says Elohim lo yisekalel, which means don't curse a dayan, nobody walks out of an arbitration and is entirely happy, right? In fact,
Correct.
They say a successful arbitration is when both sides are unhappy. I've
Correct.
seen that said. So that's good when you don't have to see your baldover again for the next 30 years. You fought over a bill, a car, or this. Okay, we're both unhappy. I pay, I hold my nose, and that's it. When you're going to be living with this person 24 hours a day in proximity, that doesn't sound like a good recipe.
I agree with you. And that's why I would not recommend to any marriage counselor or therapist who sees a couple with the dilemma that you presented earlier, that they should try to resolve that conflict by serving as an arbitrator. Now, I may have my own opinion about halacha and the primacy of halacha, and I may have my own opinion about any practice, what would be considered proper, just, and correct. However, I'm not going to be able to help this couple by imposing my view, even if I can cite sources and so on to support it. That's not going to help this couple resolve their conflict.
So how do you mediate? The wife says, I don't want to cover my hair anymore. Or I'm using that as an example. It could be 1,000 different, but it's something just very black and white and easy. And the guy says, what do you mean? It's a befarish the Shulchan Aruch and this, and you're going to embarrass me and this. And she says, look, I just don't want to do it. And it seems pretty black and white. Like, how do you mediate something like that?
Okay. It is black and white, but the way you mediate instead of arbitrating is by helping the couple to negotiate effectively. Now, negotiate, you might say, well, you can't negotiate halacha. This is where it has to be. The Torah tells us the way we're supposed to live, how we're supposed to conduct our lives. There's no compromise. How can you compromise in halacha? Well, the answer I would give is, I'm not saying you have to compromise in halacha, but negotiation doesn't mean necessarily compromising on halacha. It may be compromising in other areas. For example, maybe the wife says, there's no way I'm going to cover my hair. I can't do it. It's too difficult for me. I need to have my hair uncovered. The husband says, but it's halacha, you have to cover your hair. If he's going to stand on principle he's going to fail to accomplish his goal. I tell couples, you can argue based on principle and you'll frustrate yourself. If you approach this based on preference, then you'll accomplish much more. If the husband says to his wife, forget about the principle, forget about the halacha, it would make me feel better. It would make me more comfortable. It would make me happier if you would be willing to cover your hair. And the wife says, but I'm not. I can't. I won't. So then the husband said, well, maybe there's something I could do for you that would make you happy, that you might consider worthwhile exchange to do that. Maybe the wife would say, if we went on an all-expense fancy vacation every year, if we went 2 weeks to Florida, maybe I would consider it. If you would be willing to build me a new kitchen, maybe I'd be willing to do it. Maybe something the wife wants, or maybe if you come home from work, instead of coming home at 9, 10 o'clock, if you came home at a reasonable hour so you could do homework with the kids and give me a hand with the baths and bedtime, maybe then I'd be willing to make that sacrifice and cover my hair. So if it's approached based on preference, if the husband or the wife, whoever is arguing for the halakhic point of view, is willing to respect that the spouse also has feelings, also has needs, that this is a difficult thing. You see, when I'm arguing based on principle, there's two problems with that. Number one, if I get what I want, then I don't owe any gratitude to my spouse because it was simply the right thing to do. And I don't have to make it up to my spouse in any way, or to even be thankful because I just convinced him it's the right thing to do. And we never have to discuss this anymore because we've established the principle that this is the right way to go about things. Now, no spouse is going to accept that. That's setting the bar too high. If I argue based on preference, then it means you are entitled to my appreciation, that I am indebted to you for this, and that may be that may be enough incentive to loosen the logjam that this couple is experiencing. And I've seen that before my very eyes, so that's how I know it works.
You're saying make it as stop using the authority of either halacha or law, whatever it may be in your circumstances, and turn it into a personal negotiation between two people who are basically trying to respect each other's boundaries.
You said it very, very well. Excellent summary.
What happens
I see you're a good listener.
Thank you, Dr. Wikler. I've been accused by many of my listeners of not being a good listener, so I take that. Thank you. One of our highlights. Dr. Wikler, what happens when there is an incontrovertible, like the wife digs in her heels, or the husband, and I don't want to be misogynistic here. I spoke to a very noted psychologist, and he said, what do you do in a marriage where the husband just stops keeping Shabbos, but otherwise they love each other? Let's say it's an incontrovertible where he says, listen, I don't want the cruise, I don't want the kitchen, I just, I feel really unattractive. I had beautiful hair, and when I put on a wig or what, and I don't want to seem that it could be, and it really creates a logjam. And I know you have haskamis from Reb Shmuel and Reb Perlau and many other. I understand many Rabbanim speak to you. What do you do? How much halacha can you sacrifice for the sake of Shalom Bayis? Let me give you a case. You have a husband, and he just doesn't like to daven. He doesn't want to go to shul. And it's Elul, and he gets up, he davens for 30 seconds, and he runs out the door, and the wife says, it's Elul. And he says, listen, I don't care your preference, mine. The kids see it. What do you, and I know I'm asking you difficult questions, but we live difficult lives, and people have difficult issues. What do you do when it's a halachic issue that it can't be moved?
Well, as I said to you before, a couple comes to me with that dilemma. It's not my role to condemn the wrongdoer. That will not help this couple to resolve their differences and to cope with the situation. Now, I know there there are many cases where someone simply refuses to observe or obey halacha, and there isn't anybody who's going to convince them to change. And then a spouse is faced with the decision, the personal decision: do I stay in this marriage or do I leave? It's a very personal decision. It's not a decision that I would make for somebody, or that I want someone to make for me.
Yeah, but Dr. Wikler, it's not really my question. My question is something else. My question is, there is some halachic precedence, right? I mean, you see that for Shalom Bayis, you are moichik the Shem. The Gemara says a Metzira, the Gemara gives halachic preference to a Metzira because of Shalom Bayis. Rabbi has a famous tshuva where he allowed a mikveh to be built in a shul, in the Ezras Nashim of the shul, even though there were all kinds of issues with, Kedusha Kala, with Pritzis, etc., and he said because of Shalom Bayis. So have you or your Rabbanim you speak to ever approach and say, look, here is the halacha that he doesn't want to go to shul, and the Rav says, if you could be moichik the Shem, so you just have to look the other way. Have you ever, or your Rabbanim, discussed this, where the other spouse is just saying, look, I'm willing to make it work, but I just want to know that I have some type of a halachic guideline for this, and I'm not just, taking everything I learned in my whole Messiah and junking it. But okay, we can make an exception for Shalom Bayis. Have the Rabbanim or you ever come across that?
Yes, I've had cases that I have consulted Rabbanim on in situations where a spouse had completely abandoned Torah observance, and the question was at that point, the couple couldn't stay married under those circumstances. But the question is, what about the contact between the non-halachic observing spouse and the children?
But let me go back. You say they couldn't stay married. Let's say you have a couple, and I've seen this. I've spoken to these people where the husband became unobservant, and the wife and him, they said, we love each other. We mutually love the children, right? What would you say in such a case? Can they stay married?
Of course, they could stay married. If they can't. The spouse that's staying observant obviously cannot violate any halacha in order to stay married. They can't be mechal Shabbos. They can't be over on Taras and Mishpacha. But if the other spouse is willing to accommodate, to allow the religious spouse to remain religious, then it's certainly in the best interest of the children to maintain contact with the parent who's non-observant, rather than exclude him or her from the home and have nothing to do with them. It's a challenge. It's difficult. It presents enormous chinuch challenges, because the children see that one parent is not observing halacha, and they say, well, how come, why do I have to do it if my parent isn't doing it? And it's very difficult to raise children under those circumstances. But at the end of the day, it's better for children to have a relationship even with a non-Torah observing parent than to have no relationship with them at all. And if it's a positive relationship and they have good feelings for each other, and the husband and wife have good feelings with each other, I know of cases where that has worked. There's a landmark book that came out many years ago called Times of Challenge, and there was a follow-up to it. I don't remember the name offhand, but there was a personal account of a woman who became a Balas Tshuva, and she became 100% from. And her husband said, we got married, we weren't religious. I still love you, but I can't go along with this. And she became a complete 100% Torah observant Haredi woman, and she managed to get her children into good yeshivas in Eretz Israel, and she raised all the children to be B'nai and B'nos Torah, in spite of the fact that her husband was completely non-observant, but he didn't do anything that against his wife or interfere in her observance, and they continued to live together, and he was totally non-observant, remained totally non-observant, and didn't change that at all. And it was difficult for her, enormously difficult. The hardest part for her was getting her kids into yeshiva, where the father was just totally Mechal Shabbos and didn't observe any mitzvahs. But she was able to convince Menayel in Eretz Israel to take a chance with her children, who were good Talmidim and were star pupils in the yeshivas where they attended, and it worked. But it was certainly a challenge and a difficult Nissan for her, and no one should ever have to be a Chalila faced with that Nissan. But at the end of the day, this woman made a decision, which I think was correct, that it's better for her children to have an at-home, loving, attentive, caring father, even if he's totally irreligious, than to have no father at all.
So, Dr. Wikler, for the purposes of this discussion, we picked the most stark cases. But if you're saying that even a totally irreligious parent, like a father, it's better to keep him in the house if there's family harmony than to exclude him, you would say a kal v'chomer ben b'nai kal v'chomer if it's not on such a stark thing, but it's on more moderate disagreements, like going to minyan or all the other questions, on Shabbos, etc. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing what I think is patently obvious, but you would agree with that?
Again, I must say you're a good listener.
Okay. Let me ask you a final question.
Sure.
It's more of a hashkafa question, but I think it has a real implications for Shalom Bayis. How responsible are you and I, or our spouses, or any spouse, for their spouses' Yiras Shamayim? It's both a halacha question as well as a practical question, because you find opinions all over about hechech, it is bisman. You do know how, you don't know how. And I'll give you a very simple example. It's Elul now. A woman calls. She says, my husband never goes to minyan. He doesn't go to slichas. He goes Shabbos. I'm lucky I push him out of, he go, and it creates real Shalom Bayis issues. I say, you have to be going to shul. You should be going to minyan. And then you have it the other way too, where the husband says about the wife, she doesn't this. Do you take the attitude in a marriage? Listen, marriage is primarily ben adam l'chaverei. It's about making sure your spouse's needs are being met, etc. And it's their relationship with the Rabbi Shalom is their business. Or do you say, look, Ishtay Kegufay, right? Adam and Chava, Duper Tzufim was initially one person, and, if one limb hurts, the other limb hurts. So am I responsible for my spouse's Yiras Shamayim? That is the question I put to you, and from somebody who's 40 years, Shalom Bayis expert with haskamas from all the Gedolim in America.
Look, that's an exaggeration, but I'll let it stand for now. Certainly, it's not my responsibility. My spouse's ruchnius. My spouse's gashmius is my ruchnius, but it's not the other way around. So it's part of my religious obligation to be concerned about the health and welfare of my spouse, but it's not my responsibility to be my spouse's mashkiach. Having said that,
Rabbi, Dr. Wikler, who are you? Is this an opinion from many years of counseling, or is this something you've heard from Gedolim? I mean, there's a famous saying from, I believe they say from Rabbi Stroll, and he used to say, we should daiga whether our friends gashmias and our own ruchnias, not the other way around. Yeah. But he said it about friends and associates. We don't know that he said it about a spouse. Have you heard this from Gedolim, this opinion, or is it just something you're saying from my practical experience?
from my practical experience.
Okay.
However, having said that, there are still issues of ruchnius that each spouse feels does affect them personally, their spouse's level of ruchnius. Whatever one spouse does is a reflection on the other one, and is going to generate feelings, positive or negative. If the husband is not going to slichus, it's not going to bother the wife just because she thinks he should be, but because her own self-esteem, her self-image, she's a wife of a man who doesn't go to slichus. It's going to hurt her in a personal level. And then it comes back to the issue of principle versus preference that I spoke about earlier. So even though it's the right thing that the husband should be going to slichus, but if the wife is approaching this issue with her husband based on you should be doing this, then she's just going to meet up against a brick wall and encounter even more resistance, and her husband's going to end up sleeping even later. But if she approaches him and says, listen, as a Beis Yaakov girl, I always, it meant so much to me to know that my husband going to slichus before Rosh Hashanah and so on, and it would mean a lot to me, and I think it would be important for the kids to see that you're going to slichus, and what could I do to encourage you or to help you to do that for me? Then I think she'd get a lot further. I'm not saying it's a responsibility to do it, but if it's affecting her personally and it's something that's bothering her, she's certainly entitled to her feelings about it, and she's entitled to discuss it and negotiate with her husband based on preference, but not on principle.
Dr. Wikler, it's both educating and it's an honor to have you on with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
We have the honor of having with us on the phone Mrs. Slovei Jungreis-Wolff. She's the daughter of the world-famous Rabbi Esther Jungreis, the founder of Hineni. She is, for many years, I think 25 years, she is the lead lecturer and teacher of Hineni couples, lecturing on Shalom Bayis and parenting. She's the author of Raising a Child with Soul. She's a world-famous mechaneches who lectures many times weekly. Welcome, Mrs. Wolff.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here.
Do I call you Rebbitzin or Mrs.?
No, just Mrs.
Mrs. is fine. Okay. So
yes,
you teach and you've been exposed to many types of couples in Hineni, because it's certainly not a homogenous type of an audience. It's a very varied audience. You have some powerful messages about Shalom Bayis. Could you share some of them, maybe your experiences with us?
Sure. I would say, first of all, that with time, couples tend to take each other for granted. And one of the greatest gifts that you can give is just a thank you to each other for things that you tend to just overlook. A wife does, a husband does. And I've spoken to couples and years could go by and they and their children have not even heard a thank you. And when children don't hear the thank you, there's a reflection of what is going on in a marriage and in a home, and there's a sense of entitlement. So one of the greatest gifts that you can give to your husband, to your wife today, is just say thank you for things that we overlook and take for granted, because when you appreciate, you have hakaras hatov. And hakaras hatov, this attitude of gratitude, helps you be aware of the goodness that you have in life with your spouse. Many times we have pressure and we have stress and we forget about the good. So we just think about what's bothering us and we don't see the hakaras hatov and the positive that we have.
And what is, Ms. Wolff, what is the power of a thank you? Isn't it just two words, meaningless? When somebody asks you how you're doing, you say, oh, Baruch Hashem. It's meaningless because you may be doing horribly and you say, Baruch Hashem. You may be doing great and say, Baruch Hashem. It's like when somebody stops you in the street, how are you doing? It's a meaningless question. Is thank you have any power to it?
Absolutely, because the first thing we say in the morning is moda'ani. And not ani modeh, I am grateful, but moda'ani, grateful am I, because this attitude of gratitude creates an atmosphere. So when you're mindful, that's the whole thing, that most of us are not mindful. We just mindlessly say, oh, Baruch Hashem, yeah, thank you. But if you're mindful and you take a moment, even when you say modim every day, to think about the good that you have, you realize that you have much more good than you are aware of. And this brings simcha in life. You really become a happier person when you're a grateful person. It's not easy because stress tends to take us to a negative place. And when you walk into your home and you bring the stress of your life with you, it just is like toxic. It's like secondhand smoke, and everybody feels it, and there's a shadow. So if you're wanting to better your Shalom Bayis, especially as years go by, I would say number one is have a point of some hakar satov in your life daily that you can think of something that you're grateful for and express that gratefulness to your husband or to your wife. Give your husband and wife a good word. Ask yourself, when was the last time I gave a good word? Admiration, affection, appreciation. Those are the 3 A's. And they really give strength to a relationship. It's so easy just to focus on the problems and say, hey, what happened with this? And the principal called about that. And what about this bill and that bill? And then you start losing the connection. And it's all about issues and stress and struggles.
And how do we, but how do we do take our spouses for granted. We take our health for granted. We take our spouses for granted. We take ourselves for granted. How do we change that?
Well, the first thing is to be, as I said, mindful. It's kavanah. Like when you say Moda Ani in the morning, take a second. And most of us think it's just for kindergarten children, but it's really not. I will say in a parenting class, look in the mirror before you see your children. Look at yourself. Would you want to wake up to yourself? Would you? Because if you wouldn't, then why would the rest of your family want to wake up to you? So take a second. Everybody has a struggle, but everybody has also things to be grateful for. It's a whole different mindset that you can create. It's not easy. But once you decide that you're going to be a more positive person, catch yourself being negative. Catch yourself at the end of the day. How many times did I express a good word, an encouraging word to my spouse? Because if I can do this, it's especially now that we're in Chodesh Elul and coming to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, it becomes a whole new way of life. Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. Simcha is huge, but where does simcha come from? Show me a person who's grateful, and I will show you a happy person.
Wow,
Give
that's
yourself,
powerful.
But it's true. It's so true.
So you said there's 3 A's. Appreciation. You also mentioned admiration and affection. Could you speak about those a little?
Sure. Appreciation, as we said, hakar satov, things that you take for granted. Thank your husband, thank your wife, just for simple things, dinner on the table, going to work and coming home, being there for you, being there for your children, carpool, filling the car with gas, little things. I once had a couple come to me that's such an issue because one did not feel that the other appreciated the little things that they did every day. And the spouse said, what? That's what you're supposed to do. But hakar satov doesn't only come when you do something exceptional. It's what you are supposed to do. Then that's the whole lesson of the Makos. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu, when he had to express his hakar satov for the Nilas, and he wasn't able to hit it. Why? Because the Nilas carried him as a baby. Did the Nilas go out of its way? Absolutely not. It isn't even something that's alive. But Hashem wanted us to understand hakar satov comes from anything and certainly anyone that is of help to you, and that certainly comes to a husband and a wife. So appreciation daily for the things we take for granted, affection, just to give an encouraging word, even a smile. My Zayda would say, Geb a shmeichel, give a smile, kost nish kein Geld. It doesn't even cost you anything. Think how difficult it is sometimes to give a smile. You walk in after a hard day. What does it take? Sometimes I'll speak in a high school to girls, and I'll say to them, you come home, your mother's been waiting for you all day. You come in, and she says, how was your day? And you say, fine, and you throw your knapsack down. Supper's not ready yet. What would it do? What would it take to just look at your mother, look at your father, and give a smile and say, hi, Mommy, or hi, Daddy, hi, Abba, hi, Ima. You know what that does for a person? And the opposite is the same, for giving a child a smile instead of, did you brush your teeth? Did you do your homework? Did you take a shower? Put your things away? A smile. is a sign of affection. A good word is a sign of affection. And admiration means that we encourage each other. And that creates tremendous Shalom Bayis. It's so easy to bring each other down and say, oh, I told you, you made that mistake. We look at mistakes. We look at negative moments, and we build ourselves up sometimes by other people's falling down. And that's a terrible, terrible recipe for a lack of Shalom Bayis. Give encouragement to a husband. Give encouragement to a wife. Say, I know you can do this. And the same in parenting and children, because when we parent our children, we parent ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, am I a discouraging human being? Am I a discouraging parent? Who is going to be there for your children, for your spouse, if not you? No one else in the world. So this is the atmosphere that we create. And we can create Shalom Bayis or Chas v'Shalom, God forbid, we can destroy Shalom Bayis. So easy, just through a word, through a gesture, through rolling of the eyes. You can really kill somebody.
What happens, you taught at Hineni, you teach at Hineni for many years, when there is a significant difference in the religiosity of the couple, and this creates Shalom Bayis issues. How do you counsel people to deal with that?
Well, it doesn't only have to be, people who are becoming more religious. Even in the religious and frum world, you can see sometimes that a spouse gravitates towards a different direction after marriage. And yes, it could create tension. I would never give a blanket statement, because every person is an individual and every couple has their individuality. So I take it couple by couple. No, I'm not a therapist, but I am a Torah teacher. And when somebody comes to my class, there's a connection, one family to another, and I get to know their children, and I get to know them and their personality. So if there is such a struggle, then we work together, and we try to make it as good as it can be, with patience, with ahava, with love, without imposing. But, if sometimes there's a couple and let's say she wants to up her Shabbos and her husband doesn't, which is very frequent. So I will say to her, you have to find a way to do it without making your spouse feeling as if you're forcing something. But what does he like? He likes to, let's say she'll say he likes to have friends and company or certain foods. So I'll say, make that into your Shabbos. Invite the company that he likes. Make it into, a wonderful atmosphere instead of feeling like, no, this is what I want and this is what it has to be. A lot has to do with communication when it comes to Shalom Bayis. We might have the most wonderful ideas, but we lack the skills of communicating properly. And when you do that, you make a person feel distance from you instead of closer to you. So if you really want to up your Shalom Bayis, every issue can really be tackled, but you must know how to communicate properly.
Now, what happens when a husband says, Eze isha kshera oser etzon bala? Listen, I'm the boss. I have halachic authority from Chazal. So I don't want to negotiate, nor do I have to negotiate. It's oser etzon bala. This is spoon-fed to the girls in seminary, and some of the guys have caught on to it, or maybe historically, and how do you deal with that? He says, look, I'm coming from a position of authority. It's like, no, this is not a democracy.
I don't really believe that is what Chazal meant. They cautioned us very carefully on causing a wife to have tears, very, very carefully. And an attitude like that does not bring ahava. Ahava comes from the shorish of hav, which means to give. And you give to a person, you invest in a relationship. And when you come with harshness, whether it is towards a child or towards a spouse, just as a plant grows and gravitates to sunshine, so too human beings gravitate to warmth.
But what do you do? What do you do with that? That Chazal, which seems to give authority to the male member.
I would say that you can't just say something is a close-cut, case. Every couple really needs to have a Rav or a Mechanech or a Rebbitzin that a wife is close to, a Mechaneches, to really go through the struggles of life. The goal of marriage is not to stand under the chuppah. The goal is to make it ad Meir v'Esrei. And so you must know how to interpret a chazal. You must know, as we said, how to communicate. What's my goal here? If my goal is to keep my marriage alive, then you don't come as somebody who is demanding in a marriage, because you are not really going to gain affection, and you're not going to gain an environment where there's chiyus, where there's life and growth. So I would say to such a person or to such a wife that you need to consult with a Torah authority to really navigate attitudes and chazal. It's not just one chazal that we live with. We live with a whole way of how is it, what is the derech that I want in my life and in my home? What is the atmosphere?
And Mrs. Wolff, another question, similar line of, let me continue this thought. You have a disagreement, and does a couple go to a Rav or to a therapist? I mean, you could have a Rav who could be a very wonderful Rav who's been divorced, or may have not Shalom Bayis of his own, or even if he has both of the above. You know, people go to school for many years to become an LSW or a psychoanalyst, etc.
100%.
So
right.
where do you go? Do you go to a Rav or to a therapist?
I think, as I said before, every couple is very individual. If you do choose to go to a therapist, then I would say be sure that it's somebody who has your hashkafa and your Torah values, because a lot of confusion and harm can come if you're with somebody who does not understand where you're coming from and what your goal is in life. And they can take you to a place that's not a Torah place. So you can discuss with a Rav can guide you. It really depends on the situation and the issue and how deep it is. Sometimes I'll have a couple come to my home and Baruch Hashem, they'll leave. I'm not a therapist, but they will leave with resolution. But sometimes there are much deeper issues that require a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of understanding and a lot of study. So I'm not one to ever say there's a blanket equation as to do this or go to this person. You have to find what works for you. And sometimes, just like when there's a health issue, Chas v'shalom, you have to go for a few opinions and a few doctors until you find your comfort level. It's the same in this case. But you have to find somebody that you feel strong with and comfortable with, who carries the values that you do. That's very, very important. And that you feel secure with.
Thank you very much. That was very powerful.
I appreciate being here. Hatzlacha Rabba to you, and my best for Shana Tova, Kesiva v'Chasima Tova to all of our listeners.
Thank you. Hold on.
And this is the answers to last week's Halacha riddle.
Yes, hello, this is Yiras Wagner. I just wanted to try and answer the riddle. With regard to how come the Chacham could be machmeh and do it, like in he can't go to Aegis. So why can't he say Aegis? Because when it comes to Aegis, they're going to do Trisha v'Chakira on the guy on the road, on the Talmud Chacham, and possibly Tracer's Dvarov, and that is a greater bizayon. Mashki Tracer and Ganson, potentially, what the Chacham is going to say, and that's a greater bizayon at Torah. And I saw this in Yiras Shamayim with regards to another Nekuda, but I think we could say this shot for the Zahman. Hatzlacha Rabba, Bye.